Hello, and welcome to the Freebirth with Jesus podcast by Awaken Birth. I am co-host Alison Collins.
And I am co-host Nadia Taylor. We are radical Christian mothers and birth keepers who are passionate about Jesus and free birth.
On the podcast, we will share testimonies of Christian mothers from all across the world who have free birthed with Jesus, and we'll talk all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Welcome to Free Birth with Jesus. This is the podcast where we talk all things free birth with Jesus. I'm Alison and Nadia is my co-host. And today we have Bekah and she's here to share her birth story about free birthing with Jesus. So Bekah, if you want to, we will start with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for being our God. Thank you for uniting us as children of God. Thank you for the children that you have blessed each and every one of us with. And I thank you for the moment that we're about to experience listening to Bekah's birth story where she trusted in you, Lord, and she stepped out in faith in you. And so, Lord, I just pray you give her the discernment and the wisdom and the words of life to come out of her as she shares. And may this light be shone all over the world so people hear her story and women feel and families feel super encouraged by her story. I thank you that you have given Nadia and I the blessing to just be that vessel to just stand there and hold space and just make a way for that light to shine. So yeah, just thank you so much, Lord. And I just pray you with us during this time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So we have Bekah on the show with us today, and we're going to start with some introductions. And yeah, Bekah, just let us know a little bit about yourself, where you're from, when you became a Christian, and then when you're ready, feel free to share your birth story.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm from Delaware, which is in the U.S., kind of on the East Coast. I am a wife and a mom to two children. I have a almost 3-year-old and a 6-week-old as of tomorrow. So, yeah, I'm in the very fresh postpartum season. So I was raised in a Bible-believing home. We were taught about Christ from a young age, and so I knew I wanted to give my life to him pretty young, and I first became a Christian. I became a Christian at 13. I think I was 13 or 14. And later on in my teens, there was a time where I was not walking with the Lord, and then after I had my oldest, I struggled a lot with anxiety, and I had just gone through a really traumatic birth experience, and it was really a hard season for me. And it was during that time that I sort of rededicated my life to God. And I've been walking with him ever since. And it's been incredible. And having him a part of, my next birth story it's been really amazing. So, yeah. So a little bit about my first birth. I'm 21. So I got pregnant when I was 18. And I always knew I wanted to have kids young, and I was always so excited to have children, and I come from a big family. So my mom has 10, so I have 9 siblings. And my mom would have had 8 home births. So there's five kids under me, and they were all home births. So I grew up around that, pretty familiar with that. Yeah, when I found out I was pregnant, I was so excited, and I think I had wanted to have a birth center birth at first, only because I thought birth centers are cool and, it was something different. So this would have been in 2020. The beginning of 2020 is when I found out I was pregnant. So I was going to a birth center, but I actually only had one appointment with them, and they wanted all the other appointments to be like Zoom meetings or whatever. I wasn't really into that. So my husband and I got married in July. At that point, I would have been about maybe 7 months pregnant. So I moved across the U.S. to Delaware. I was from Tennessee, and I moved to Delaware. So I had an appointment with a birth center there, and I didn't really love it. So we ended up interviewing a midwife, and at about 33 weeks, I think, I had decided I wanted a home birth. So I was really excited about it. I really didn't have any fear surrounding birth at all. Growing up and seeing my mom have peaceful home births and everything, I just thought it'll happen. It'll just, it'll be okay. So yeah, I just went into it with a lot of faith. And with that birth, my water broke at exactly 40 weeks. And there was meconium in the water. And so just to make a long story short, because it's not really the birth I'm going to talk about a lot, but my midwife wasn't comfortable with that and sent me to the hospital. And they did an ultrasound after we got there and said she was breech. And because my water had been broke for 12 hours, they told me, you don't have any other options except a C-section. And I was devastated because I didn't even really know anything about C-sections. It had just never even crossed my mind that I would have a C-section. And it all happened just so fast. And yeah, it was super traumatic. It was just a really traumatic event for me. And I was so hurt. I wasn't familiar at all with the way the medical system is with birth. I didn't know about that because I hadn't really grown up around hospital births and that kind of thing. And yeah, I wasn't super informed about any of that because I really had a lot of faith that it would just be okay. So I walked away from that birth it was really hard. I was really, really traumatized by what had happened. And, I remember going home to my birth room we had set up and just crying in my birth room because I had just been so excited about my home birth. And so I kind of, I sort of put that behind me and just didn't think about it too much. And I did have a pretty good, good recovery as far as C-sections go. And yeah. So when I started thinking about having another baby and, I want a lot of kids. And I started sort of asking around, what are my options, since I had a C-section. And sadly, I was told that, there really aren't any options. Midwives here legally cannot attend VBAC births. They won't do it, under the books. And the hospitals here have extremely high repeat C-section rates. And so I just was like, I'm not going to the hospital. I'm just not going. I had such a horrible experience. I would never, ever choose to birth in a hospital. And so I contacted every midwife within a couple hours of me. And they were just like, we're sorry, but we can't. The laws here are so intense. So in Pennsylvania, which is about 2 hours from me, they are allowed to do VBACs. The midwives are allowed to. And I found a midwife there that said, yeah, she would take me, but I would have to drive there to their little clinic, I guess, to give birth. So I had my first appointment with her at 13 weeks, I think. And I really, really loved her, but I just didn't have peace about it. I was just kind of I didn't love the thought of driving 2 hours for every appointment. In the end, that's every week. I didn't like the idea of driving 2 hours when I go into labor. And I just told my husband one night, I told him, I said, I want a home birth. I want to birth at home. And I kind of played around with the idea of free birthing. And me and my friend would kind of joke about it. Yeah, we're just going to free birth. And I said, well, if I can have one, successful vaginal birth with a midwife, then I'll free birth. So as I had 2 appointments with that midwife. And after the second one, I had posted on my Instagram about my first birth story and kind of how that went. And a girl that I knew on there messaged me and was talking a little bit about Freebirth Society and her situation, and kind of she had listened to Freebirth Society or whatever. So I didn't know anything about that, but I started just binging their podcasts, and that gave me the maybe I could do this kind of thing. So I remember one night I looked at Ray, my husband, and I was like, I think I'm gonna free birth, and he just starts laughing, and he's like, I knew you were gonna. And he was so supportive. He knew that I was convinced, and he was he's so supportive of it. And I was kind of talking myself into it. And, I was still kind of like, can I do this? I think I can do this. But then I started really like thinking deeply. I started asking myself, why wouldn't I do this? And all of the reasons I came up with were just fearful, just fear that has been fear mongered into us by the medical system, not fear that was really based on anything. And so I just started sort of, in my head, making a list of what am I afraid of? And then I would research that, with a VBAC, everyone wants to tell you like uterine rupture, so I started researching that, and it's like a very low statistic that it even happens. And so I was like, oh, well, I'm not scared of that anymore. And then it was like, well, what if this and this and this? And I would just research it, and I would be like, it's actually not that scary. And so I just really started gaining confidence, like I can do this. And also really just, I spent a lot of time praying about it and really seeking the Lord and just, asking myself, do I really trust him? Do I really trust that he has created my body for this? Do I trust that he is going to give life to my child if it is his will, And I started just realizing, I do trust him. And so I texted my midwife and I just told her I'm going with another option. And she's so sweet because I told her that and I didn't tell her what my option was. And I was at a conference a few weeks later and she was there and she came up to me and she was like, are you going to free birth? And I said, yeah. And she was so sweet and she was really supportive throughout the whole thing. Like I would text her and she would give me support over the phone and stuff. And I was really, really grateful for that. And, I think she knew I was in a really hard situation. And so I was so thankful for her. So I guess I would have been about 20, I would say I was about 23 weeks at that point. So another thing was I have a very supportive family. And I knew that my family would be so supportive. And I actually called my mom that morning and I had said, like, here's what I'm thinking about doing. And my mom was like, oh, yeah, girl, like, you got this. And so it was after that I actually texted my midwife because it like gave me the courage to do that. So I had so much peace after I had decided to do that. And the rest of my pregnancy, so my pregnancy was horrible. I get hyperemesis, which is terrible. So I was terribly sick for the first little while. And then at 25 weeks pregnant, I broke my ankle. So that was terrible. So my pregnancy was really rough. But as far as like with the baby, it was very uneventful. I didn't have anything go wrong. It was fine. My body was doing its thing. And so let's see, I attended my older sister's birth while I was pregnant. She had a home birth and that was my first birth to be at. So I was really glad to have that experience just to kind of get a glimpse of like what it actually is in real life, So about 35 weeks pregnant, I think, I started having prodromal labor. And it would start at night. It was normally in the evenings for a couple hours, but then I would go to bed and take magnesium and go away. And 36 weeks, I think, I went up to the midwife I had used because I wanted her to feel the position and tell me what she thought. I had tried to do the belly mapping, but I wasn't super confident. And she told me that the baby was posterior. And I had been having a lot of like lower back pain and stuff, so I wasn't super surprised about that. So I just kind of was like, I'm going to do what I can to turn this baby from being posterior, but if the baby needs to be posterior, that's okay too. Another thing that I had done over this time was I had gotten the book Home Birth on Your Own Terms. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but that book was a huge game changer for me. It's such a good book full of information. And so I was reading that just cover to cover over and over. And I was preparing and I didn't have any fear. And I kept asking myself, like, are you afraid? And I really wasn't, because I felt like I truly trusted in my body. And that was, it was something that I would encourage anyone who wants to free birth to ask yourself, like, do you truly trust in your body? Because if you do, then that's going to get you through, a long labor or prodromal labor or anything like that. So I was a little bit unsure about the prodromal labor because I didn't have that with my first. And I kept thinking, like, is this baby going to come early or, what? But I was like, oh, oh well. And my mom and my sister were planning to be at my birth, and they are from Kentucky. So they were planning to arrive on my due date. Because I was like, with my first one, I had her at exactly 40 weeks, like on the day was when I went into labor. So I didn't know what to expect with the second one. So I kept thinking, I don't know if they're going to make it. But she would say, do you want me to come early? And I was like, no, because I don't want you to come and then I don't have the baby and you have to go home. So they got here on August 18th, which was technically 40 weeks. And yeah, I was still having prodromal labor every night, every evening, but I could still sleep, it was just in the evenings and then it would go away. Yeah, so they got here on the 18th, and that was an evening. The next day we got up and we went to the park and just spent some time out and about. And that afternoon, I started having some bloody show. And so I knew that something was getting started, and it could probably be a while, but I didn't know. So that would have been Saturday. Sunday morning, we got up and we went to a brunch at my friend's house. And I was kind of having contractions on and off throughout the day, but it was nothing consistent. And then, let's see, so we went swimming that night. We went to a pool and went swimming, and I tried to do like some rolling around and stuff to try to flip the baby, because I was pretty confident that she was posterior at that time still. So I was doing some crazy stuff in the pool. And then, let's see, so Sunday night I had contractions probably every 30 minutes, and they were pretty intense. Like, I would wake up but I could stay in bed and just kind of like go through it, and it would, I would go back to sleep for 30 minutes. But then Monday morning, they just kind of fizzled out. And so, yeah, so Monday, yeah, my husband stayed home from work because I was like, he drives and he goes pretty far hauling loads. And I was like, I don't really want you to be like hours away, because I just didn't know. And I had a feeling that because of the prodromal labor, that when it really started, it was going to be quick. And so I just didn't want him to be far away. So, yeah, so he stayed home from work, which I think in the end was like totally jinxed me because my labor just went away. So Monday, yeah, I went riding on a golf cart with him. That's what I did. We went in the woods and rode around on a golf cart. I even like climbed halfway up his tree stand to try to like jostle some things around. But I don't know, nothing was really like, it was just kind of staying the same, like contractions, but they weren't very consistent and they would kind of go away for hours at a time. So I knew it wasn't time yet. So then, let's see, Monday night, I had them every like 8 to 11 minutes apart all night. At one point, my sister and I were in the living room together, and I had a couple that were 4 minutes apart. But then I went back to bed, and they went back to about 11 minutes apart. So I didn't get any sleep that night. And yeah, so that was my second night of being up a lot, and I was so exhausted. So the next day was Tuesday, and I had a chiropractor appointment that day. So in the morning, I kind of stayed in bed. My mom and my sister left to go run some errands, trying to give me some alone time to see if that would help progress things. But they spaced out by early afternoon, so I went to my chiropractor appointment. And I was glad I made it to the chiropractor appointment. But I was having really intense contractions, but they weren't consistent. They weren't close together. But I was like, these are like pretty intense. When I was driving home from the chiropractor, I would have to pull over when one would come because it was pretty intense. So my sister and I went out to eat. We went and ate spicy food, and then we came home and I texted the midwife. And actually, funny, she was pregnant and had the same due date that I did. So that was another thing, was I didn't even know if she would be able to deliver or if I would have to use a backup midwife. So I texted her and told her like what was going on. And I basically was kind of like, this is annoying, you know? And she said like she's going through the same thing. And she said she often sees moms stall out in labor or not go into labor when they're so sleep deprived and so tired. And so she was like, really try to sleep. And she told me to drink 6 ounces of wine and to take 2 Benadryl. She said, because you need to sleep. And so I was like, okay. And like, I don't ever take stuff like that, like Benadryl. Like, I didn't even have Benadryl. I had to go like buy it at the store. And I was like, I need to sleep. So, yeah. That evening, so I drank the 6 ounces of wine and I took 1 Benadryl because I was scared that what if I really was going into labor and then I'm going to be knocked out and not be able to do this because I'm going to be so tired. So I drank part of the wine. It was like pretty nasty and I'm not really like a wine girl. So I was like, this is terrible. And so I laid down to go to bed and I told my husband, I said, I have to sleep. And I had actually that night kind of like broke down and cried. And I told him and my mom, the way I feel so tired right now, I genuinely don't know if I can go through a long labor. And I had posted to my Freebirth group I'm a part of and just said like kind of what I'm going through, and I just needed some encouragement. And this one lady had commented and said, yeah, like I went exactly through that. And then I started into a 30-hour labor. And I was like, I don't think I can do that. Like, I don't think I can handle that without having sleep. And so I was praying, Ray and I just prayed. And actually, I think it was, I'm trying to say what night it was. Sunday night, maybe, I think, that him and I had gone walking out like in the woods. And we had just prayed together and prayed like, that it would be a short labor when it happens. And that if it's not real, it would stop. And so again, we just prayed and we were just like, can I get some sleep or can it happen? So I felt a lot of peace. I just felt like, it's going to happen. The baby's going to come. I trust that my body is doing what it has to do. And I know that there's a reason I was having prodromal labor. And I do think that it was really my body trying to get the baby in a better position. Yeah, so I laid down to go to sleep and the contractions just kept coming. I would say it went from probably every 20 minutes to like every 11 minutes. I think my contraction timer was like 8 and 11 minutes. And so that went on until, let's see, probably around midnight. They got a lot closer together, I'd say 4 minutes apart. But again, Monday night I had contractions 4 minutes apart and then they went away. So I was just like, this is not real labor. And so I was every 4 to 5 minutes, I was jumping out of bed and like leaning over my dresser, and my husband would have to get out of bed and come put pressure on my back. And I was having, all back labor. And we had our 2-year-old sleeping in our bed. She still sleeps with us. And she would get really upset when we both had to get out of bed. And we found out later, we were not paying enough attention to her at the time to know this, but she was actually sick and had a really high fever. And so she was just, she really wanted me to cuddle in bed with her and I couldn't. And yeah, so I texted my sister at about 1:45 in the morning and I said, I don't think it's real labor, but it's coming, every couple minutes, and Ray's needing to be in bed with Addison. Addison's my daughter. And so I was like, can you help me? Now she's sleeping in my guest room with her 2 little girls. And thankfully they were sleeping. And so she said yes. So she came to be my support for a little while. And So I told her, I was like, I think I want a rice sock, like the hot rice socks. So she made me a rice sock, but that wasn't it. So I had an ice pack, and the ice pack did a lot for me. I actually kept that throughout the whole event. It kind of helped me stay grounded in a way. And so, yeah, I felt really supported having her there. And my mom was staying at my friend's house, and so we didn't want to wake her up unless we thought it was, real labor. So I had a few contractions, and I really think that I was expecting it to be a lot worse than it was. And so I was like, there's no way that this is real labor. And I was in so much denial because of all the prodromal labor. And yeah, so I had gone in the bathroom and tried to check myself for dilation. And I was like, I don't know what I'm checking, but I don't think I'm dilated. And I came out and I was like, I must be such a wimp because these hurt. And I'm not even dilated. But funny story, I would have been about fully dilated at that point. I just didn't know what I was checking for. So I go back out, and I'm squatting through my contractions, and I'm shaking, and I had vomited at one point. And I was like, I'm not in labor. This is so annoying. I just want to go to bed, And so my sister says, hey, there's this thing you can do where you check the butt crack for a purple line. And I was like, you're crazy. That's just crazy. And she was like, no, let's do it. So she takes a picture of my butt, and she she looks it up on her phone of what does this mean? And she's like, and because the purple line was out the top. And so she's showing it to me, and she's like, what do you think this means? And I could tell she didn't want to be like, I think you're about to have your baby, in case I wasn't. And I talked to her about it now. It's so funny because she said she didn't know. She thought it seemed like I was close, but then again, we just didn't know. So I told her, I said, well, look, sometimes the last couple nights when I get in the shower, my contractions will actually stop, which is odd. I know for some women it picks up, but it had stopped for me a couple times. So I was like, maybe I'll get in the shower and they'll stop. So she turned the shower on for me, and she got my birthing ball in there and wrapped it in a towel and stuff. And my husband had gotten back in bed because he was I remember right before this, he told me, so he had taken off work Monday and Tuesday. And we had said obviously you need to go back to work tomorrow. And I remember him saying to me, I'm going to go to work in the morning. And I was like, okay. So he laid back down to go to sleep because I said, I'm going to get in the shower and just end this. And so I got in the shower, and I had a contraction, and so standing up, I had one contraction, and then I sat down on my ball, and I just prayed, and I remember just rubbing my belly and saying you can come now, it's okay. And then I had a super intense contraction, and I stood up and my water broke. And so I reached up and I felt a head. I could feel something hairy and wrinkly. And I asked my sister, I was like, is this why does it feel hairy and wrinkly? What? I just expected it to feel hard, Yeah. So, trying to remember. So I think I said to them, I was like, my water broke. Well, when my water broke, that contraction, the fetal ejection reflex kicked in, and I was I was very shocked by how that felt. And the only way I could describe it is throwing up. When you vomit, there's just, you don't try to vomit, it just and that was the feeling I had. I was like, whoa, this is intense. So, but I was also really, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. And I really wasn't I wasn't out of it. I was very alert. I was very aware of what was happening. And so I said, my water broke and I can feel the head. And my husband and my sister both are and she was immediately go fill the birth pole. So my husband runs off to quickly fill my birth pole because I wanted to have the baby in the water. So Yeah, so I had a few more contractions in the shower, but I really wanted to get out. So I got out and got on the floor, like on a towel, and I had a few more there. Um, and then I tried to have one on the toilet. That was not it for me. So I think I had a few standing up, like with my arms around my husband's neck, and those seemed to really progress, but it was progressing very slowly. It was not at all like her head was coming down very fast or anything. Um, so thankfully, I was able to get in the birth pool, and my sister called my mom and told her, like, you need to come quickly. Um, so that would have been around, let's see, I got in the shower around 3, so that would have been around 3:30 probably. So I just was resting in between my contractions. That's the amazing thing about the fetal ejection reflex is you don't have to be just actively pushing and wearing yourself out. You can just relax in between contractions. And so I didn't feel super worn out, even though I was crazy sleep deprived and everything. So yeah, so I got in the pool and I just was letting my body do its thing. I actually found that after the baby's head had come down that far, my back labor kind of ended. Like it didn't hurt in my back as much. And so that was like a short time of relief before the crowning. Yeah, so I had a paranoia tearing. I did not want to tear. And my main reason was just I didn't want to have to leave and go to the hospital. I didn't want to have to get stitches. So that was the one fear I had surrounding my birth. And I had mentioned it to a couple friends, and they would just be like, haha, you won't even think about it in the moment. That was all I was thinking about. I was like, I am not letting this baby shoot out of me. And so when her head started crowning, I think I literally said to myself, like, immediately no. I was like, this is there. I don't think this is going to work because it just felt like there was no way this was going to fit. And so I was not allowing myself to push. Like, I was like, whenever my body would start pushing, I would like pant through it and just allow her to come down a little bit further. And I tell you, it took, I want to say it was close to an hour from the time my water broke to when she was actually born. Um, and the contractions surprised me that they weren't more painful, but her head crowning surprised me with how painful that was. I didn't expect that. And I was like, whoa. And at one point I looked at my sister and I said, I feel the ring of fire. And my husband's like, what's the ring of fire? So, but he was so sweet. He was just there with me and just like saying, you can do this and you got this, and just super supportive. And my sister was amazing. There were so many times I looked at her and said, like, is this normal? And she's like, yeah, this is fine. So I'm in the pool and my mom got there and her head was like crowning, like just starting to come out. And it was still like another 10 minutes, I think, before her whole head came out. So I'm panting through my contractions and trying to let her be born very slowly. And then, yeah, finally there was nothing I could do. My body just pushed her head out. And I said, her head's out. And my mom was so cute. She was like, her head's out, and she like dives her hand in the pool to feel. She just couldn't help herself. um, and so I asked them, like, what time is it? Because I wanted to know what time it was when her head came out, and they told me. So then I rested, and I looked at my birth video, and it was about 3 minutes before her body was born. So I was just resting on the side of the pool. And my motto for this whole birth and pregnancy is just that God is the giver of life. And I just remember repeating that to myself, like, you are the giver of life, Lord. And I asked my mom to pray. So my mom started praying. And yeah, like as my mom was praying, her body just slid out on the next contraction. And she had the cord around her neck, but it just felt so natural. I just unwrapped it and pulled her up to my chest, and she cried right away, which was something I had specifically prayed for. And we actually didn't know her gender. So I looked and it was a girl, and that was so sweet because I just knew it was a girl the whole time. I just felt like it was a girl. And yeah, so I was just in awe, like I had done this. And I was very aware of the fact that I needed to monitor my bleeding and to kind of like stay alert to the situation. And so, yeah, I noticed there was a lot of blood. So I told my sister, like, get me my tinctures, get me Angelica. So I took Angelica under my tongue, and I wanted to get out of the water so I could see more like what the blood loss was. I'm pretty low in iron. And so I knew like I wanted to be cautious with that. So I stood up to get out of the pool. And like as I stood up, my placenta just plopped out. So that would have only been about 2 or 3 minutes after the baby was born, maybe 3 minutes. So my placenta delivered really fast, which is probably what that initial gush of blood was. So yeah, I got out of the pool and I sat down, leaned against it, and tried to help her nurse a little, but she was just looking around and wasn't interested at the moment. We brought in our 2-year-old. She had actually been like in and out of the room. And we brought her in to meet her new sister. And that was when I was like, I think she's sick. Because I remember she walked in and she looked at my placenta next to me in the tub and looked like she was going to vomit. And she's not normally queasy about stuff like that. And so I looked at her closer and I was like, I think she's sick. And yeah, she was. So my husband took her out and rocked her in the living room while my mom and sister got me situated. So I moved into the bed, and I think at that point I was taking the womb syringe under my tongue just as like a preventative. I didn't know. I felt great, and I know that like blood loss is not a one size fits all. And I kept asking my sister, how do I look? And she would say, oh, you look good. Your lips are pink and you look fine. So yeah, I moved to the bed, and I think I got up and my sister helped me to the bathroom. And as I was walking there was like blood pouring down my legs. I say pouring, it wasn't like crazy, but it was a little bit. And then I sat down on the toilet and it sounded like I was peeing and I wasn't peeing. And so I stood up and I looked at Faith, who's my sister, and I said, that's a lot of blood. And she said, yeah, it is. But again, I wasn't dizzy. So I moved to the bed and we propped up my legs on some pillows, and she rubbed cypress oil on my legs, and I took my womb syringe under the tongue like every minute. And my bleeding I got under control really quickly. So I was feeling great. So then, let's see, about maybe 45 minutes to an hour after, I cut the cord and tied it off with a cord tie I had braided myself. So that was sweet. Yeah, and then, it was over. My mom was bringing me drinks and food, and at 6:30, which would have been 2 hours after she was born, my husband and I and both our little girls were cuddled up in bed, ready to go to sleep. I couldn't sleep. I had a crazy birth high, which I did not have with my C-section at all. I was like, whoa, like I can do anything. Like, I think I might go do something crazy just because I can. Yeah, so that was crazy. I didn't sleep all day because I was just like, everyone come visit me, because I just wanted to like tell everyone about this, and yeah, so that was something different for sure. But when I crashed hard because I hadn't slept in like days. But yeah, it was just, everything I had ever prayed for. And it happened differently than I had imagined. I thought I was going to give birth like with like affirmations and like my salt lamp. And I did labor sort of with that. But when the birth happened, it was just real and it was raw and it was beautiful, but also not, So the affirmations just, I had those on a little bit, but every time a contraction would come, I had to turn them off so I could focus. So it was different than I imagined, but looking back, it was just God directed it exactly as it needed to happen. And yeah, I'm just so grateful to him. Yeah, I had a wonderful experience, and I'm so happy I could come on here because I I just want to share with, other women that it's not, the hospital isn't your only option if you're in these situations, and we were created to do this. We were quite literally made for this. So yeah, I'm just so grateful.
Thank you so much for sharing, Bekah. That was beautiful. Like every woman, I say this every time someone shares a birth story of theirs in person on here. It's just, you learn so much, and it's why it's so important to hear and share it. And especially being Christian, just having those moments where you're like, yeah, I had to dig deep into my faith. And the moment you were talking about your husband and you praying together, and like just knowing that is such a big thing about our faith and being with Jesus, is like that unity in a husband and wife. We've quite literally united our DNA with Jesus, like husband and wife, and now we're going to birth this unique human that he's created inside of us. And so it's really cool to hear other women talking about that and how God's working. And I hope it's such a big thing for people. So at the beginning, you were talking about with your previous birth that you had meconiums in your water. And I just wondered if that was something you had to work through going into this pregnancy and birth, that, was there any like concerns, or, what did you do to kind of like to kind of overcome that fear if you had it for meconiums? And even if it's not a fear, like, did you feel like you had to work on it in any way?
Yeah. So I did a lot of research about that to kind of understand what would I do in that situation again. Yeah. And, I don't think I would have gone in. I think that, there was a lot of that I had to kind of just put my fear aside and had to trust that this could happen, but it probably won't happen, but it might happen.
Yeah.
And that, God is going to, he's going to give me the wisdom and the intuition to know what to do in that situation. Yeah.
That's awesome. Because I know that, I have 5 children. And so every pregnancy, every birth, I've had a new thing that like I've experienced something, or I've heard something in a particular someone else's birth story, and I'm like, well, maybe it might stick with me, and I just need to like work through it. And it's different every baby. So yeah, that's why I thought I'd ask that question. And I just wanted to say as well, the fact that you broke your ankle while pregnant and you were like, yeah, but baby's fine. I love that. Like, I just think what an encouraging thing to hear, that you're like, well, my ankle is separate from my womb and my baby, and I just wanted to point that out, because I just thought that was amazing, because we can think that and look, our body is intertwined, absolutely. But in that sort of sense, like to hear that, no, there is somewhat of a disconnect. That was encouraging to hear. And so that would lead me into my next question, which was like, I know you had your midwife, the private midwife that was like 2 hours away. Did you have any other prenatal care? Like, did you go to your local hospital? I don't know how it works in your state, but did you do anything like that?
No. So I only had the 2 appointments with her. And then, I got a blood sugar testing thingy. I had a blood pressure cuff. Yeah, I checked in. I feel like I did my own prenatal care.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't have any other care.
Yeah, cool. So did you have any ultrasounds?
So I actually volunteered at our local pregnancy center.
Yeah.
And so I had, at 15 weeks, they had wanted me to let them test out their new ultrasound machine on me. And this was right around the time I was like looking into ultrasounds, like, are these actually safe? And so I had major anxiety the whole time. I was like, the baby hates this, let's stop. And then I had one more with them at, I think, 30 weeks to see if the baby was head down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was actually really helpful that I had that. It helped a lot with getting her birth certificate, because that can be kind of tricky,
Yeah. And then my last question that I have is, was baby posterior, or did she turn?
So I don't know. When she was born in my birth video, I said, I don't know which way you came out. And what I meant was, I don't know, because I felt like she was coming out face up.
Yeah.
But then I remember feeling her head when her head was out before her body was born, and she wasn't face up. But her head had a very odd shape. So I don't really know. I kind of wonder if she turned while she was coming down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But
and you did mention
I
that like
can't remember.
the back pain slowed down when she was coming down. So it may have been that she was turning or something, and then it kind of gave you that little bit of relief. Yeah, that's awesome.
When in the moments where you first started feeling her head or seeing her head, and that hour that you said it took probably till the time her head came out, you were saying how it was apparent, or like it was on your mind about really wanting to take things slow, and did you feel, my question more of is like, did you feel that maybe initially you ended up tensing up or like resisting her? Or did you feel you did surrender and you just didn't actively push? And then combining that with, did you feel at all the Lord speak to you in that moment of going anything like, just trust me, I've got you, or anything like that? That like, or did that moment, that whole hour of her coming out, did it stay the same the whole way, or did you find initially something shifted to the end? I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So with the whole hour, I would say it was only about 10 or 15 minutes that she was actually coming out. So the hour was when she was kind of coming down. But looking back, I think that I've said that maybe having that fear. So I did end up with a small like labial tear, and I kind of wondered, like, having that fear, like, did I manifest? I don't think that I was scared. I think that I wanted to stay home. And I didn't want to have to go into the hospital.
Yeah.
And so I had, really tried to figure out how can I not just let her fly out and end up with like a 3rd or 4th degree tear.
Yeah.
And when her head started coming out, I really do think that if I would have pushed her out, like actively pushed, I would have torn really bad. Because it just felt like, so I would kind of pant through the pushing contraction, like the fetal ejection reflex, and it would burn so bad. And then as a couple minutes passed, it would stop. It was like stretching.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I had the fear of tearing as much of fear of going to the hospital.
Okay. Yeah.
Did you end up like self-assessing afterwards? And finding if you did like have any kind of grazing or tearing or anything like that?
Yeah, so I could feel when her head came out that I had torn.
Yeah.
And so I just knew I had a little bit. But I had one of my friends come kind of look at it, and she was like, it's not that bad. I think it felt worse than it looked. And I actually healed it with honey, Manuka honey.
Yeah.
It healed really, really well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Cool.
That's awesome. Do you have any more questions, Nadia? Sorry.
Just one more.
No, you're fine.
I noted in the part that you said, like, with the blood loss, and you're the one who initiated the thought to your sister, I think it was your sister, about like, hey, this is a bit of blood. Hey, and then she said, yeah, I think so, or something like that. Do you feel, one, I think that's really good that, no one in your birth space presented fear to you. Like, you were the one to initiate bringing up that statement. Hearing your story, did you feel that you were kind of in control and very supported, that no one took or questioned or brought any of their personal fears at the birth?
Yeah. So I was very cautious with who I allowed to be in the birth space. And, I think that they all had a lot of faith in me, that I had done my research. I had done the work. And also, everyone there, they were all believers, and we all trusted God,
Yes.
We prayed together. We did all that. And there was just so much prayer involved in my birth and the preparation of birth, and I filled them with the information. I was learning about like blood loss and how, and my sister is on the same page as me 100%. And I just knew that I wanted to go off of how I felt versus how much blood it looked like.
Yeah.
And we had talked about that ahead of time. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with your postpartum, is there anything that happened during postpartum that you felt was beneficial or was like, something that you would encourage other women, even pregnancy, birth and postpartum really, that you would want to like say, hey, this was really beneficial for me, like, and impart some of that wisdom from your experience? What would you pass on?
Yeah. So I think the number one thing I would say is fear is often the absence of knowledge.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times the fears that you have, if you take the time to not take it from someone else, don't hear someone's experience or something that could happen, but rather, research, when does this happen? Why does this happen? How do you prevent it? What do you do when it does happen? You can really take away a lot of the fear surrounding birth, because you realize it's really not that scary, and I videoed my birth and I showed it to a lot of my friends, and one of my friends I showed it to was like, that's not even scary. Like, that doesn't look scary. There wasn't, it wasn't like you see it in the movies in the hospitals, right? So I would just say, if you have fears and you wonder, can I do this? Address your fears and gain knowledge,
Yeah. I think that's so true. I remember with I free-birthed my twins in 2021, and I had a wild pregnancy as well. So it just kind of came through every step of like what like appointments you're meant to have and what you're supposed to do next. And each of those things, it was like, I could remember it was either working from a place of fear or just like autopilot. And it was like, why am I working in autopilot? Like, I don't even actually understand why I'm doing this or why I would have to do this, because I didn't actually attend them. And so, it really came down to that place of knowledge. Here in Australia, if you're pregnant with more than one baby, if you're pregnant with multiples, legally midwives are not allowed to attend home births. So that was, the first thing for me. And it was just like, I just had to understand it. And the knowledge was huge. It played a massive role, and it helped me work through those fears, and I could bring those fears to God and be like, okay, God, this is where I'm freaking out. But I know I trust you, but I'm feeling this fleshly freak out episode right now. How can we work through this? So I fully agree that knowledge, as you said, fear is the absence of knowledge. Very wise.
Yeah. And I mentioned that, Home Birth on Your Own Terms, that book.
Yeah.
And that was a huge source of my knowledge that I gained.
Yeah.
And I think that book is good no matter what your birth plans are. It's just, it's good to know things for yourself and not to rely on someone else to know it for you.
Yeah.
And I think that it gives us a huge sense of confidence if you can, know all these things and know how birth works and how your body works.
Yeah, 100%. Because at the end of the day, no one is doing this for you. Like, even when I know you had a C-section, like, yes, you have a surgeon who's doing the procedure, but no one's the one pulling you through whatever you're thinking and going through in the moment of getting a C-section done. And then it's the same for when you go on to free birth, like from complete opposite sides of the spectrum. Like, no one's recovering, no one's taking care of that baby but you. It's, it's a huge responsibility, and it's weird to think that we've built this society that just tries to encourage women to not think about it and not think about how they themselves would take responsibility or control over their own personal choices and their baby. Yeah, it's a very odd thing to think about.
Yeah. And I think something that made a huge difference for me postpartum is just having support, and my heart breaks for the women who are free birthing and don't have support. And, one thing I really loved about my birth and postpartum was just, I reached out to the women around me, the women that have gone through this, to examine me or to, support me in the ways, rather than, I don't know. I just think, let's normalize going to our mothers and other women who have done this before versus maybe a doctor who doesn't even have children.
Absolutely agree. I 100% agree. Like, this idea that a woman who is, a mother and has only been a mother for like 3 weeks, like her opinion's invalid because she hasn't been a mother long enough. And it's like, that's not okay. Like, she has so much knowledge to share, because it doesn't, like, I've got 5 kids. That doesn't matter. Like, I'm not more of a mother than she is. We are both equally a mother, and she may be ahead in things more than I am, and vice versa, because we experience life differently. We experience motherhood differently. And that's why it's so important, like you were touching on, community. And having our mothers or our sisters, whether they be biological or not, being able to have that community and be able to rely on them. But it's also important to always remember that we then have to be that community when we're not the pregnant birthing mother at the time, but when it's the opposite, when someone else is going through it, like, we can then hold that space for them. And that is far more powerful than what is set up right now. It is so powerful, because mothers are very powerful. Thank you, Bekah, for sharing your birth story. We really appreciate everything and all of the wisdom that you have imparted onto us, and hopefully all the listeners and viewers. Yeah, it's always such an honor when women are sharing their birth story and being able to be invited into that space even after the event of birth, because it is still vulnerable to sit there and talk about, one of the most beautiful and vulnerable moments of our lives. And that includes previous births, especially when we're talking about trauma as well. So I do really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your experiences, and hope that many women are blessed by what they've heard today.
Thank you for having me. I was glad I could come on.
Yeah. Maybe we can end in prayer.
So we just lift up Bekah and this episode and conversations that we've had with her today, and her being open and vulnerable, sharing lots of details over her life and her birth experiences. And we just pray that whoever does get to listen to this and has the opportunity to hear Bekah's story and this episode, that you would just, your presence and your spirit would be over their experience, over the recording, and you'd speak to them in however way that they need to receive it. And we just love how every woman's birth experience is unique and different. And, there's nothing that we would change. We all experience the good and bad and the ups and downs in our journey. And we just pray peace. And we thank you that you gave Bekah that peace, that first she knew she wanted to have a home birth. And she was on that journey of finding who would support her. And even in the end, when there was that bit of distance with the midwife and unsure of like who was actually going to be there, you gave her peace to know that you would never leave her, and she wouldn't have to do this alone. And even though she did get to have full support from her husband and her sister and her mom who got to be there, you still were there and never left her. And I just pray that this testimony of her experience would just be used with whoever's listening, and it empowers and encourages other moms, especially if they're VBAC. Whether they've got fears of meconium or bleeding or tearing, that you would use this story to just speak peace and clarity of bringing up any fears that they might have. And I just pray blessings over Bekah and her family, and just thank you so much for today and this episode. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for listening to the show. Tune in next week for another episode of Freebirth with Jesus.
To share your story on the show, check out our website and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at awaken.birth. Don't forget you can watch this episode and more on YouTube.